So Helen has mentioned there a question from Dr. Henimore Elder, who has talked about Indigenous women. So she's asked on the panel's experiences and views about the impact on Indigenous women around the world, and Helen's talked a little bit about that, but also perhaps building on that, any recognised Indigenous groups that are providing leadership and advocacy on this issue, and if not, where could that come from? So I'd like to invite any of the panel to comment on that. And because we've just got a few minutes, I'll put the second one to you at the same time as well, and you can choose how to interact with it. But the other question is from Taylor Martin, who talks about those who are in politics now. And I think this is a really useful question. If we've got pro-choice politicians now, what should they be thinking about and taking from this experience and bringing into their work? So there you go, 2 questions about Indigenous leadership and what can politicians now do?
Perhaps I'll go first. So in the US, in response to Roe versus Wade and the really critical question around Indigenous or Native American leadership, this is one of those areas with the US that there has been a struggle for a long time in terms of hearing those voices from the communities. We know that Indigenous women are disproportionately impacted in the US, like they are everywhere. And I think it's just important to sort of say what we're seeing in terms of those red states, those 16 states that are directly impacted by Roe versus Wade. And to Helen's earlier point is, yes, there are definitely women traveling into blue states or into Mexico to get their services, but there are also women that can't afford that. And what a lot of women, specifically Indigenous women and other marginalized groups, are instead doing is self-administering, so taking the pills to safely end their own pregnancy. But what is known is that those women self-administering are disproportionately impacted. They can't afford to travel. They need safe medications, and there are some really incredible activists stepping forward to provide that service. So very quickly, I think there's a distinction to make towards the time. The abortions can be done safely with tablets now, and that's happening. We just need to be very mindful about those groups and who is disproportionately impacted. And then very quickly to answer the other question in terms of what can pro-choice parliamentarians and others do, a lot of that is to continue doing some of the good work that has already been happening. So the example I gave with the Freedom of Religious Belief conference and the way that that had been politicized against women's choice, there were, for example, the Netherlands and some of the Nordics that really stepped out and supported organizations like ours to make that visible and to demand more of their governments. So we need to keep seeing that, and obviously examples like today and seeing the leadership from New Zealand, Canada, Australia, we're just going to need more of that to make sure that those reversals don't go wider.
Holly, on that question of what can politicians do, I think what politicians can do is to make this a political debate. The thing about Roe v. Wade is, and most people don't realize this, it was never a political decision. It was a decision by the Supreme Court that that the politicians weren't involved in at all. We saw the politicians get involved in the lead up to to removing it, and it took them a really, really long time to be able to do that. But they engage at a grassroots level with a political movement. So I think the lesson that all of us have to take is, one, we have to keep advocating for fundamental rights of every individual to bodily integrity, and create that perception within the citizens of every country, and then to create the ways of how they can engage at a very grassroots level, and how all these movements can come together. At Women Deliver, we're going to be hosting a conference next year, which we hope to be able to provide a platform for many of these activists to come together to talk about not just this issue, but other issues, as we've already spoken about. It is an erosion of all these rights that are taking place. But there's also, like I said, a great deal of optimism where you have so many examples of Ireland, Mexico, Colombia, Chile, Sierra Leone. Yes, it was the health minister and the president who announced it, but there was a whole movement behind that of activists and civil society actors who were pushing to have that in place. And if we take an example from the US, one of the reddest states, Kansas, actually put it forward as as a referendum to vote on, and they were immensely shocked by the fact that it did not pass. So abortion rights were kept in place in Kansas because it was taken to a vote and people galvanized. And I think that's the key lesson, is that it has to be a political movement. There has to be a political space to discuss it. And the changing perceptions of the vast majority of people around this issue, even in contexts that were very, from a religious point of view, were very conservative, has changed, and we have to create that space for it.
Yeah, fully agree, Alia, and Holly. I think we need a political champion. We need a political champion to add to the voices, powerful voices of Helen Clark and others. At this point in time, we don't see a political champion. I think Helen Clark and others, maybe a few are projecting their voices, but we need solidarity in the political space. And I agree with Balia, we need a mass movement on this. At the moment, sort of it is dissipating, compared to a few months ago. And I think that we need to keep the fire light. And that, for me, is sort of a mass movement at a political level, civil society level, at different levels of the community as well. And I think that's where we need to direct our energy now. And of course, civil society and organizations such as Plan and others, Women Deliver and others, are really pushing on this. But for me, it's a question of creating that mass movement, the solidarity. And then just perhaps, we mentioned this earlier, but I think it's incredibly important to stress on it. Really community-led organizations. It's important, because this is where we start creating awareness. This is where we create sensitization with the community. This is where we work with faith leaders to create that awareness. And especially like Zimbabwe, where women who go through abortion are reported to the authorities and arrested and jailed. Now, it's total lack of awareness and sensitization. So if we really, support these community-led organizations, and as I mentioned earlier, in my viewpoint, led by young people, girls and women, this really is where we're going to make that change at the community level, to bring in that sensitization awareness that is important, but also to ensure that they speak in safe spaces on these particular issues. So I get a feeling, I get a sense that the momentum is slowly and gradually disappearing. That is my concern. I think we need to step up again, because we are dealing with these issues every day in a very hostile context. And with the momentum disappearing, it's not good for us. I would like us to really build on the momentum and keep on. And I think this webinar is one of those that I think is very important. We could do a lot more in speaking out on this issue. Thank you.